Welcome to the Strain Podcast, a Southgate Media Group production, where we talk all about Guillermo del Toro's horror fantasy series, The Strain. We are currently covering the series' third season on FX. I'm your host, Blaire and Kyle, the executive producer and host of Professional Geek Podcast, and with me today is Kyle Tremblay, the editor-in-chief at TVBinges.com. You can find us on Twitter at Blaire Loves TV and at Kyle Loves TV. And remember, both Kyle and Blaire have an E at the end. And you can follow this podcast's Twitter handle and live tweet with us every week at The Strain Pod. And don't forget to play hashtag The Strain Bingo with us every week for a chance to be on our show this season. Hi, Kyle. How you doing today?
Oh, Blaire, I'm trying to come to terms with this episode. There was a whole lot going on. I feel like I've been on a roller coaster, and at the end of the roller coaster, a Strigoi bomb went off. So I am just trying to sort out my feelings, which I'm sure we'll do in real time on this podcast.
Yes, we will. Today, you and I will be discussing Season 3, Episode 4, titled Gone But Not Forgotten, which was written by Regina Corrado. She previously she was previously a writer on the TV series Deadwood and Sons of Anarchy, and for The Strain, she wrote the memorable episodes Battle of Red Hook and Dead End, the episode in which Icarus kidnaps Dutch. So as far as I'm concerned, Regina Corrado really hates women, but I don't know how you feel.
There is so much to unpack with this episode. So much that I think was very bad about this episode. There was a point in this where I was like, why am I watching The Strain? Like, just in a big picture sense, why am I spending time on this? And then there was a point where I was like, is this some of the best stuff The Strain has done? And I don't know where the line between those two things is, but this one really confused me, and also, like, I thought was really touching at points in a way that The Strain almost never is. And I am really, really confused right now with this episode.
I'm going to say that you and I had the exact same experience,
Oh,
Kyle.
good. Oh, good.
Because there was a moment where I was like, this is trash, and I'm tired of talking about this trash. And then there were parts that got really, really interesting, and as you said, touching. I would say, from the perspective of somebody who works in media and television and stuff, that the editing of this episode is the best it's been for the last 2 episodes. So, with the exception of episode 1 of season 3, which we already agreed was an anomaly, that this was sadly this episode, Gone But Not Forgotten, was very well paced despite being silly at times, and kind of flowed seamlessly in a way that The Strain doesn't usually accomplish. So that was like one of the things that kind of kept me going the whole time until it really got interesting.
I mean, I think there are 2 main points to hit, and I want to tackle the less interesting one first, what I think is the less interesting one, because the second one is Feraldo's whole deal, and there was a lot going on with Feraldo here.
So much to unpack.
So much, but first I want to talk about the last couple episodes here. There's been something that's, like, really confused me, and that continues to be the case. And in this case, it was, so at the end of the previous episode, Abe very clearly saw the Master's worm escape. Mm-hmm. Like, the editing of that previous episode made it very clear that Abe saw the worm crawl out of the Master's decapitated body and escape. We didn't really know if anyone else saw it, but we knew that Abe did. Cut to this episode, and everyone is acting like the Master is gone for good, and Abe is not saying anything to stop them. Like, he saw that worm climb out. Even if he didn't know what that worm was, like the audience, he could have put 2 and 2 together about what's going on here. It was a giant earthworm. It's not like one of the standard strain worms. I think we all know what happened there. And Abe, I thought that moment at the end of last episode was like the dawning realization of that. And I thought for sure Quinlan would know, like, based on the prophecy, like, he would be dead right now if the Master was dead. We went through, like, 35 minutes of this episode without anyone acknowledging that.
Yeah, I had to tweet at you for you to even know that they had acknowledged
They
it.
finally did. Abe, in this conversation with the ancients, Abe is like, yeah, I saw the worm exit. Really, Abe?
See, so I was getting really messed up about that too. And then I kind of settled down and realized that it probably is that he didn't want to like give away his, there's a term for this. Like he didn't want to show his cards. So he waited until he was with the ancients to make sure that they could like confirm that for him.
But to what end?
That's the most that I got out of
No,
it.
no, yeah, okay, I'll buy that he doesn't fully trust Quinlan, even though he's been sleeping under the same roof as him for a while now, and if Quinlan had bad intentions, I mean, Quinlan's intentions have never been...
It's less Quinlan and it's more F to me. That like F was around for the most of the time that he would have had anything to say about it, and he wouldn't trust F with that information.
With the information that the Master might still be alive? Why?
Well, and Quinlan because they ran away with the tuxedo ramen. Right? They ran away with it, so of course he's going to be like really careful with that information because
sure, but
they're not trustworthy.
he literally goes with Quinlan to see the ancients.
Yeah, that's the part
Like,
that doesn't make any sense.
There was clearly, first of all, the way to go, Abe and Fett, for not immediately sussing out that it was F who betrayed you. He was literally he shows up, he acts super suspicious, Quinlan is immediately onto him, and then the tuxedo ramen disappears, and Abe and Fett don't even realize it until F tells them himself the next episode? Fine. But so obviously when F told them they had animosity towards F. There was no animosity between Abe and Quinlan, like that I detected at least. Like they go together to see the ancients. They still seem to be working together. I don't know. I don't understand their relationship, I guess, and I don't know why that information should be kept from anyone. I mean, if you had, wouldn't you, like, when you're dealing with the police or something, be like, hey, the Master's still alive, that's why the Strigoi didn't all die. Like, I I guess, in my mind, a rational person at the scene, Quinlan decapitates the Master at the end of the last episode. Abe sees the worm squirm off, says, yo, 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 a worm just squirmed off from the Master's head, let's chase it. Like, isn't that, like, what any human being would do?
Yeah, my boot would be on that worm.
Yeah, right. I'm going to chase that worm, and then if I can't chase it, I'd be like, you guys see that? The worm escaped from his head. I think the Master's still alive. Like, no matter how, like, isn't that what you would do? Like, why was Abe's first response to that situation, I'm going to keep this a secret?
I don't know.
And why when he is talking alone with Fett later, and Fett is like, yeah, let's celebrate. We gotta celebrate. Abe is like, yeah, I'm happy. This is my happy face. It's like, no, you saw the worm escape. You know the Master's still alive. Why aren't you telling Fett?
I don't know. That was another one that I wasn't quite.
I
didn't understand. No, they've been making a lot of weird. But we acknowledged this with the Zach thing that happened too, where Kelly was eating the 12-year-old boy. Like they're doing a lot of weird lack of communication with the audience. Like they think the audience is there with them, but really, like we are 10 steps behind because they are not explaining themselves.
It's not at all, and it's this is a very sort of traditional trope in TV, which is create tension by having characters not communicate like any rational person would communicate. You know, this happens throughout like sort of mediocre dramas throughout history, which is that when your show doesn't have enough tension, what you do is you have characters not say things to each other that they have no reason not to say. Like right. there's no motivation for Abe keeping that information secret. But the show needed to have that pseudo reveal at the end that the Master is still alive, even though it was clear to every single person watching this show that he was still alive. We didn't think the worm was a coincidence at the end of the last episode. And the idea that this crimson worm that Lar, our new friend who's had 2 scenes now, told us about, like, why didn't they tell Quinlan about it? Like, as Quinlan himself said, to his credit, why didn't you guys tell me about it before I went on this mission? And that is never satisfactorily answered, as far as I remember.
No, it is never. But I mean, again, like if you're looking for subtext or something like that, my best guess would be that the ancients don't want Quinlan to kill them, and if they know that about them, then it's like maybe they're hoping they'll burn the master or something. I don't know.
I don't
Like
this has to be explained. Like, this is so not obvious. Like, I need to know why. I understand there is sort of an undercurrent of distrust between a lot of the parties here, but I need to know why characters are motivated to withhold crucial information from one another.
yeah.
Like, these characters are supposed to be working together towards the same goal. If they're not, then I need that information to be laid out for me a lot more clearly than it's being laid out. Because I did not, none of that tracked. And then when Abe finally said it, it's like, oh, so he did see it. Like, at that point, I had started believing that Abe didn't see the worm crawl out, which actually would have made more sense. Everything in this episode would have made sense if Abe didn't see the worm, and that was just bad editing. But no, he did.
Nope, it was very intentional. He did.
It's just...
I'd also like to point out that if we don't see the ancients again, I'm gonna be real bummed because that's been fun.
I mean, we have to see them again.
We have to see.
Not,
well, yeah. Quinlan said, "You will never see me again." So, well, yeah. Then how else are we going to see them?
Yeah,
but
they have to play a role.
But no, going back to what you're saying, I totally agree with you, and I think it's very frustrating because I think, as you said, it's just like it's for the sake of drama because they don't have anything else. It's filler.
Yeah.
It's 100% filler, which is why they took 3 episodes away from the strain this season, and they're still giving us filler.
I know. It's I mean, we've made that point the last 3 episodes, I should say, where it's just like you have a 10 episode season and we're still dealing with stuff like this. We're still dealing with characters not communicating at a like fundamental level.
Right, like at a human level.
At a human level, they can't
coworker level.
They can't just say things to each other. We really had to not have Abe just say that he saw the worm right away and go from there. That really took away an extra 10 minutes of dialogue that you needed to fill this episode. Like, why? What is the utility of that? Like, just have Abe behave like a normal person and go from there. Like, I don't understand why the strain gives itself these degrees of difficulty. But speaking of behaving like a normal person, we have to talk about Feraldo.
I know, that's probably going to be the rest of this
episode.
So just FYI, everybody. But that's intentional because almost this entire episode followed Feraldo.
It was a Feraldo episode.
It was very Feraldo-centric. I was very proud of myself for tweeting, "Welcome to the strain." Oh, no, I can't remember it now.
You forgot your own good tweet?
I have my own good tweet. It's what's the thing that they say with, whose line is it anyway?
Oh, where, I think you used this line last week on the podcast.
I did, but I made it better.
Where, it's something that don't matter.
Everything's made up, and the rules of how to kill the bloodworms don't matter.
There we go. That's the one.
Yep.
We got there.
We got there. Sorry, everybody.
It was worth it.
It was worth it. That is what happened with Feraldo this episode, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that... Okay, I am certainly not one to be a stickler for the rules of the Strigoi. So I had no problems with Thet burning the worm within her face. I thought, honestly, like, that whole sequence of events to me was the redeeming light of this episode.
Totally.
And some of the best stuff the strain has done, I think. So I am fine. If you want to bend the rules to give me a great dramatic scene, go for it. That's, that there is, speaking of utility, there is clear utility in that. So I'm fine with that. The other stuff with Feraldo to me is what's concerning. Well,
okay, so we needed another human big bad because obviously Palmer did not play. Like, everything that they've tried to do with Palmer for the last 2 seasons.
Palmer's off the show at this point.
Yeah, it did not work. It's so funny how kind of, like, yeah, he's old and frail, but in the books he's still kind of terrifying. And the TV show, everything they did made him a cartoon of a person.
Yes.
And so they're like, all right, well, we need to search for somebody who'd be a compelling person to be a bad guy who wouldn't be on the Master's side necessarily. And then they take this person who we have heralded as the awesome, great Justine Feraldo, and they have made her fall from grace. And it's so interesting, and I'm happy about it, but it makes me so sad.
I think you need to back up and justify that. because you use the term big bad, and I am very curious how the show perceives Feraldo in relation to that, and how the audience perceives Feraldo in relation to that.
So being a person who is a lover of genre television,
Mm-hmm.
this would be the origin story of somebody being a big bad. This happens a lot in genre television,
Yes.
where somebody who you really, really liked makes a turn for very logical reasons.
We should say we talked about this last season with Feraldo. I think
We did.
we did talk about Feraldo becoming like a fascist, basically.
Yes, we did talk about that.
And
And like, it was very clear, like the groundwork was being laid for that.
yes.
Um, and I think that I don't think we could have predicted the way that she is starting to abuse her power, but it was, to me, the most compelling thing that they probably could have done in 2016, frankly. To have this character, the thing that they're doing is the thing that people are scared of right now,
Mm-hmm.
and they did that very smartly, of having her take away the rights of the journalist. That's one of the really, really big things. Whether journalism is honest, whether or not journalism is capturing everything that is actually happening in the world, or they're being paid off, or they're being silenced, or whatever. So I think they did a very good job of letting that be the thing that makes her a bad guy. It wasn't the chain gangs, because people would have rioted because they love Gus so much. Although obviously that's going to like be the next step for her. But having it be the media, I think that was really, really smart. I don't know. You don't think that this is set up to be a big bad thing? You think they're gonna like take her out in the next episode? Because to me, I see this as being like the end of the season. It's like they are gonna have to choose between killing the master or stopping Feraldo, and then they're gonna, there's gonna be a problem because they're probably gonna want to stop Feraldo first. I don't know. Like, what do you think?
I don't know. I want to push back a bit on the journalism thing because I agree with everything you say, but the the presentation of the journalist in this instance of the TV reporter was a very negative portrayal.
Yes.
Was a decidedly negative. And I know my first reaction to that scene was, why is this journalist stopping Feraldo? And I think that is the reaction the show intended you to have. And I was going to tweet that, and then I stopped myself and said, wait a minute. Feraldo is doing something terrible. And the journalist is doing her job and is probably right. But there's also a I mean, let's get the elephant out of the corner here, is that we're talking about Trump, right? This is a thing where, and I don't know if the show is doing this on purpose. I don't know if I want to give the show, I don't know if it would be giving the show credit or not to say that they are sort of trying to make this into a metaphor, but it is almost like a situation where the America that Trump is describing is actually America. Because in this case, there is an apocalypse.
Right.
In the world of the strain, there actually is a very urgent threat to humanity. That the kind of threat that Trump would probably respond in the way that Feraldo is responding to.
Yes, I would like to just caution you a little bit, not to be on the side of Trump at all, but
No.
But this would have been filmed 3 to 5 months prior to the moment we're in right now. So
yeah, but I mean, Trump's, and that's why I'm sort of saying it's not. I don't know if the show intends this, but
right.
It's in the moment we're in. It's very hard not to see the idea of I mean, the fact that our two prominent non-white characters were conscripted into a suicide squad, essentially, to die to vampires in an abandoned building in an impossible situation under the threat of gunpoint. It sounds an awful lot like something that would happen right now.
Right.
Like that's like the parallels are very sort of stark and unavoidable, and whether they were intended or not, it seems to be that. But of course, the big difference is that there is a real threat occurring in the Strain's world, and the audience is on the side, naturally, of people who want to stop that threat.
Right.
And I know you briefly mentioned this before we started recording, and I just know the audience is on Feraldo's side.
That I mean, you saying that, yes, that gave me chills because I don't know exactly how to talk about it here on the podcast. But
Yeah.
when I asked everybody on our Twitter feed, what did everybody think of this episode? I got quite a few tweets that said that, like, they thought Feraldo was doing the right thing. And that's horrifying to me. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry if you're our listeners, but that's horrifying to me that you can watch this show at this point and continue to be on Feraldo's side because, as we discussed and as you just brought up, like the two characters of color are in a chain gang that is allowing. She is taking away the power of the journalist that is trying to identify that she has all of these people of color in a chain gang, and she is now becoming this very power hungry tyrant. And that, while yes, we want to let we don't want to let the threat of the Strigoi take over humanity, of course, but you also can't be a monster yourself to other people. You still have to if you have to be fighting for people, and if you're doing that to people, you're not fighting for people. You're fighting for your own power.
Yes, but let me make the counter case, and the case for why people would feel that way. Um, A, the reporter was portrayed as the exact same thing. The reporter was portrayed as selfish and not acting in the public's good, and as a very upsetting kind of person, and in general, and I'm not morally equating that to what Feraldo is doing, but in TV language, that's telling you that you should be against this character.
Right.
TV shorthand dictates that the person who is unpleasant is the person you should root against. And so sort of audiences are conditioned to root against that person. Second, the threat is real in this case. That the big difference, and I don't want to get further into politics than we are now, but the big difference between Trump and Feraldo is that the America that Trump explains is not America. Not it's not the America of reality. The America that Feraldo is trying to save is the America of the Strain's reality.
Right.
And so there is an imminent threat, an extinction level event that is occurring. And if there was ever a time for rights to be put on hold, and I'm not saying there is, but if there ever was a time, it would be for an extinction level event.
Right.
And I don't think the show is super interested in providing a counter argument to that. And then also, that scene with Feraldo where and this is the scene I wanted to talk about, where the worm bombs go off, the Strigoi bombs go off, and she has a worm crawl into her eye, and she's sitting there for 2 hours, terrified that it's going to show up in her bloodstream, and and she is giving a monologue about where she would kill herself as F is checking her for the worms, was poignant and beautiful and, above all else, humanizing.
Yes.
And for a show that does such an inconsistent job of providing characters with valid motivations, that is an extremely valid motivation for Feraldo to have these feelings that she's having, which is to have a very strong... I mean, we can talk about what her percentage of the pie is devoted to being motivated by protecting the city and being motivated by grabbing power herself. But that is a very compelling explanation for why she would want to protect the city, that she has now come face to face with the death that this plague brings. And so she is given a reason, the rarest thing of all that the Strain gives any character, a reason to hate the Strigoi beyond just the sort of global level threat that they provide. She has a very personal reason, and it was personalized so effectively in that scene. And I understand the audience rooting for her after all that.
I do too.
Like, I get it.
No, and I do too. And I guess that's one of the things is like, this is me as a TV critic, me as a TV watcher. I've always been very good at separating like what I think, like how much I enjoy a character between what I actually think of that character's actions. And I've brought up Dexter a lot as an example of this. If I really enjoy the character Dexter, but I think that he's wrong on every level. And I think he's the bad guy of the show. He's your protagonist, but he's the bad guy. And so when I watch this, I have the same feelings of, wow, this is a really interesting arc. Wow, this monologue is the best writing the show has ever had for a single character speaking for an extended period of time.
Yes.
And Samantha Mathis as Justine Feraldo might be one of the best actors on the show after that scene. There's a lot of good in all of that, but that doesn't that doesn't stop me from reaching my logic point that what she's doing is wrong. And I know that that's not always easy for viewers, but that's for me specifically, I guess.
Dexter is a great example, and because I think The Strain is doing a lot of what Dexter the show did, which is its audience is clearly rooting for, in this case it's not the main character, for although it's a side character, but its audience is clearly rooting for a character that is behaving in a way that is not maybe morally supportable necessarily, but also is generally intentioned towards good as the character defines good to be.
Yes.
That Dexter, that's the trick, is that Dexter defined what he was doing as good, and Feraldo defines what she is doing as good, and it's very hard for an audience to separate that out, and I don't know if the show wants you to separate it out, and I do think there are valid questions to be brought up, because remember, the prison squad was not her idea, and she was kind of horrified by it too. It was Kowalski's idea, and she was genuinely unaware of it. And then she went to visit, and she was going to shut it down, and Gus sort of didn't sell out the plan for Gus is completely lost at this point. I have no idea what he's doing. But Gus basically deterred her from doing that, and then the bomb went off, and that sort of crystallized her perceptions. But she did not initiate that prison policy. That was something that was done by the police.
Right, that she eventually had to allow.
She had the initial intention of not allowing it, but then the bomb event changed her perception. Mm-hmm. And so it just, there's a lot to unpack, and that's why I was so confused about this episode. There's just a lot with that character's motivations, and I think one of the reasons I thought, regardless of the sort of ethics of it and who actually we're supposed to be rooting for, I think the reason her story this episode was so effective is that she's one of the only characters on the show who the audience cares about, but who also could be killed off at any moment. Mm-hmm. That you wouldn't have to save it for a penultimate or a finale episode. Feraldo could die in any episode, and at least she could have died. Now, if she is going to play a more prominent role, maybe she will exit that status. But as I was watching this episode, I genuinely did not know whether she would die or not, and I thought that was a very powerful, because I didn't know if F was going to find a worm on her or not. I thought it was very possible that this could have been the last Feraldo episode, and they're going a different way. But I think the ambiguity with regards to that, and the ambiguity regards to how the show actually feels about her, is actually makes the show more compelling and effective.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I would back you up with that. I like to be confused by a villain, but and I'm going to stand my ground and say that I'm seeing her as a villain now. But I like a villain with an understandable motivation is the best villain, and they're so rare. And that's what they've laid the groundwork for. And at this point, obviously, as you said, they could kill her at any point. But I would love to see a show where there's a human villain and there's a monster villain. That's not, I mean, like with The Walking Dead, they
always do that.
They systematically have a human villain, yes. but then there are just the zombies, right? They're just like a persistent, overarching, ever-present villain. But with The Strain, it would be interesting to have, like, are you fighting for humanity, or are you fighting for the fall of humanity? And that would be interesting.
I do think, yes, and I like that. I think her motivations are nuanced in a way that Palmer's aren't.
Yes.
And what I hope happens. This is now we're getting into just sort of fan fiction territory. But what I hope happens, because this episode, like, I think the reason that people don't think, I think most people, like we said, think of Feraldo as a hero right now, and that's been her sort of her role on the show to this point, and I don't think this episode changed a lot about that. But what I hope happens is that she gets more and more sort of hell-bent on destroying the vampires at the cost of human life. Like, I hope she sends in squads to die in order to stop something. You know, like starts doing things that betrays her sort of obsession now with this. And villain behavior, basically, as you're saying, and that slowly the audience realizes that she is now behaving in a way that is as monstrous as the Strigoi. And that she places the sort of same value on human life that they do. But we aren't at that point yet. And I think I understand why people don't see her as a villain right now, and I think you might even be jumping the gun just a bit, although I think you will eventually be right. I do think that's where it's going, but I do think right now she's in an ambiguous space where she's sort of in the Zach Bauer zone, the Jack Bauer zone, where she is doing immoral things, but as of right now, I don't see the motivation for her own power so much. I know that that's lurking, but also I have no real reason to believe that she isn't acting or attempting to act in the best interest of the city. Of the city that apparently the federal government has abandoned, the military has abandoned. She's sort of the last hope for the city. And I think she's right now making tough calls that compromise her morality, but it's also like that's what she feels is necessary. And I don't know if she's crossed a line of sort of no return into villain.
Right. It's teetering on whether or not she's being a good and strong leader, or if she is as you're saying, crossing over into the villainous side. I guess for me, a hallmark of a bad guy in any modern setting is usually something having to do with the press, because that's like one thing that we as a country have decided, like, above all else, is sacred to a degree. And that, that's the only thing that really made me be kind of scared. Because I honestly didn't, when she went to do that at the end of the episode, that wasn't what I expected. And it actually affected me. And that's good. That means the Strain did something right.
Yeah.
It was very effective in everything that it did with Feraldo's plotline. But it scared me.
to be honest, I thought she was going to shoot the reporter in the head.
I did too for a second.
Yeah, and that to me would have been an incredible and affecting scene. And I think that would have actually driven the point home more. The point that you're making about her sort of descending into villainy, that would have been a very villainous move. And having her arrested is still sort of in line, but it's also like, again, the audience definitely cheered at that moment.
Yeah.
Having her arrested,
which makes me so upset.
No, but it's like that's the thing, is like there is a lot of anti-press sentiment. Like, if you want to have a sympathetic character, you do not want to make that character a reporter, much less a female reporter who is like obnoxious. Like, an obnoxious female reporter is just about the least sentimental character you could possibly craft. And, like, based on like attitudes right now, like that is reality. And so I think the audience is very much on Feraldo's side. I think this is a much more interesting story if it goes the way that you're saying. If Feraldo continues like this, where she's doing questionable things, but the audience is rooting her, which, by the way, is what the show is doing with Gus, where like he's having his mom murder people, but the show still shows no sign of like turning on him. I hope the show turns on Feraldo, because that would be so much more interesting. It would be so interesting if she becomes the Palmer character, and Palmer is sort of like, without any fanfare, just dispatched one of these episodes. and the issue isn't that a human is working with the Strigoi, it's that a human is sacrificing humanity to fight the Strigoi. That's a fascinating character, and I hope we're getting there. I hope that that's where we're headed, and that the show doesn't pull its punch and just sort of make her a sort of bland hero. A bland, morally gray hero. I want her to be like black as sin. You know, I want this to get ugly and bad, and for our sort of heroes, even for like Fett to realize that this is too much and we have to stop her, and that's what I'm hoping for. But I have no idea if the show's going to do that.
No, I'm in the same boat, but I guess that's where I immediately saw the trajectory. So
Yeah, no, being someone who watches these, I mean, you said origin story and that clicks. Like, yes, this felt like an origin story. This felt like Lex Luthor or something, you know, like a human supervillain. But also it's like I don't have confidence that that's where we're gonna go.
Well, yes, because it's the strain, and we should never have
You
confidence.
should never have confidence in anything. Last thing, because I know we're gonna end the podcast. So the Master at the end of this episode talks through one of his Strigoi to F.
Yes.
Sort of taunting him about Zach. That means the Master has a new body, doesn't it?
That would mean the Master has a new body.
Yeah. So that's like a stealth reveal.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm gonna say I was pretty terrified because there was this again, like watching how things are edited. There was this thing where I don't know if it was Icarus, or I think it was Icarus saying like he needs a new body. It needs to be big and strong because he needs to be able to fight, right? Like that whatever dialogue came out of Icarus and Kelly or whatever. And then the next beat is they cut to Fett and Feraldo, but it focuses on Fett. And it's him and Feraldo doing some planning right before the bomb goes off. It's like them doing that, and then all the Strigoi coming through, and then the bomb goes off. And immediately I thought, oh no, they're going to make Fett the Master. Like that would be a little too clever of the show to have like project it that way.
Yeah.
But for a moment, that's what I thought the end of the episode was going.
That would have been quite a turn.
But so they're saying that about the body. That makes me wonder if it's just a rando body that they found, or if it's going to be like a specific person we've met. I don't know if we've met that many like really large buff characters besides Fett. So.
I mean, if it's not Kelly or Icarus, it I don't know. Yeah, it could be. I was a little bit confused as to why Icarus and Kelly had these people who hadn't lost their hair and didn't look like Strigoi but were converted.
No, they did look like Strigoi, and then they did the makeup on them.
Oh, they did the makeup.
See,
this is my thing with this episode. That whole plot line, the Strigoi bomb, was fascinating, and I wish it would have been the A story. Yeah. I wish this whole episode would have been like I mean, the show is 2 for 2 on makeup scenes so far. I would have killed for like a lengthy makeup scene where they do the makeup on all those characters. Mm-hmm. And I want to know the logistics. I want to know like how Icarus got them together. You know, like I want to know like when they got turned. When did they get turned? Why does he have this group of people there that are just sort of waiting his beck and call?
Well, they're Feraldo's. He made a bunch of Feraldo's employees into vampires for this purpose.
But where?
They didn't show it.
That's what I'm saying. Like I assume it was in one of these raids. They aren't prison. They're not prisoners, so it was actually Feraldo's like real people. Like, how did Icarus know about them? How did he? Because he doesn't have the master thing where he's sort of seeing through all the Strigoi. How did he summon them? Is what I'm saying. Like I'm not saying that those are inconsistencies. I'm just saying I want to see that. I want to see the logistics of how Icarus organized a terrorist attack.
I just got an image of him like herding cats, like going into a group of them and trying to find them, and like no, you over here, you over here, you over here.
But that's it, right? Like that's a fascinating scene. Like how did he do all that? They just sort of all appeared. Like how did they die? What did Icarus kill them himself? Like what? I have all these questions, and like to me that was the center of this episode. That bomb going off was striking and made my skin crawl. Like seeing the worms fly on everyone when they didn't expect it, like that is terrifying.
But it's like the Battle of Red Hook. It's the same writer, right? Like the Battle of Red Hook was not the A story in that episode, remember? Right. That was like the D story of that episode.
True.
And that's the same with this one. It's like they have these big moments that aren't earned.
Yeah,
like but the big moments still are effective, but they're not earned.
Yeah, no, you're right. But see, to me, the Battle of Red Hook was just like a shoot 'em up, get the guns out, let's fire. It was done well, don't get me wrong, but it's like that's that wasn't scary. I wasn't scared. This is one of the few moments where the strain scared me. Like, the idea of a worm bomb going off at a place they think is safe is terrifying. And it sort of strikes at the core of why the strain isn't scary, which is that there are these safe zones where characters feel free to talk about things and not be attacked by Strugoi. And it's like, that really, like, cut against that, and I really, really loved that. And I wish we would have spent 35 of the 44 minutes of this episode with Eichhorst and Kelly preparing that, because that was such a cool moment. I wish we could have focused down on it. Instead, the literal next scene after that happened was Dutch and Fett having a relationship talk.
I know.
Why?
This is not what we wanted with Dutch coming back. We did not want this.
Dutch and Gus this season are on an island of just trash. They're on that garbage island that's like in the Pacific Ocean. That's where Dutch and Fett are story-wise.
Yeah, and F is swimming back and forth.
Yeah.
And F is swimming back and forth to bring them food.
Yeah, you're right.
Sometimes
F is commuting to Trash Island.
Yeah.
I said Fett, I meant Gus. Fett is good this season.
Yeah, Fett's great.
Gus is the problem.
Gus is a problem. And I wish Angel wasn't there just to tag team.
Oh, yeah.
He deserves better.
Angel took a raft out to Trash Island. Because he came in last episode.
He's hanging out on the periphery.
Oh, God. Get him off Trash Island, straight. Get him off.
Yeah, make him better. We know you can do it.
Well, maybe give them a good story.
Maybe we don't know that you can do it, but we wish you could do it.
We're trying to project. It's the secret. We're trying to project our hopes and dreams so that you can do it.
Yes, exactly. Okay, before we end, I just want to end on the note of, I think it's worth a rewatch just generally for everybody. But from an artistic perspective, this is me film school artsy fartsy Blaire. The episode begins and ends on the exact same shot of Feraldo's face, and in the first, I thought this was so great to watch her this is why I'm like, oh, they're giving us these telling clues, these artistic clues. In the beginning, she's got the light on her, and she's blinking, and she's like, blah, whatever, get the light out of my face. And in the end, the light is on her just because she's in a room with light, but she's got the scar, and it's the exact same shot, and it's just this very interesting, where as far as I'm concerned, they were broadcasting some villainy there.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of really good artistic stuff in this episode. It's shot really, really well. The transitions are really good, even though I agree. I wish the A story was the terrorism story. So just if you're into that artsy fartsy stuff, I highly recommend rewatching this episode, because it's very visually telling. It's one of those things where they're projecting a little bit more than they're saying, which is something that I wish the show would do more often.
Yeah, I want to rewatch for that reason, because I, of course, never pick up on any of that stuff.
I only ever noticed that stuff because I watched the first 15 minutes again before you and I podcast, because FX just plays it again, and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. This feels familiar. This is an interesting shot. And then as soon as it came back on again, I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we all know you notice that stuff all the time, Blaire. Don't artsy fartsy Blaire.
I'm underplaying it. Shush.
Yeah, I know. I would recommend people watch it again, and whatever perspective you had on Feraldo, watch it with the opposite perspective. Because I honestly think this episode supports both perspectives on Feraldo, and that to me is one of the most interesting things about it. You know, if you find yourself just sort of blindly rooting for Feraldo, which was my first instinct, again, watch it from the perspective that she might become one of the big bads of the series. And if you were questionable about her actions, watch it from the perspective of just rooting for her. I think that both, you can support both interpretations in this episode, and it's just very interesting and worth sort of examining your own assumptions in that regard.
I agree with you. We didn't have any winners for the Strain Bingo, right?
No, our friend, oh gosh, Caroline?
Yes.
Catherine,
yeah, I think at Nyan Cat.
Yes, yeah, she came so close. All she needed was the Tuxedo Ramen to appear. Someone mentioned it, but mentions of the Tuxedo Ramen don't count. The actual book has to appear. And it did not, and she was one square off.
But we did have quite a lot of squares, so next week could be a big one, guys.
Yeah. We, about half the card was potentially filled up this episode. Just none of the none of the 5 in a row has happened.
No, none of the 5 in the rows. Although I'm looking, and there's one that definitely almost happened besides the Tuxedo Ramen one.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, there's a lot. All right. This wraps up our 33rd episode of the Strain Podcast. Before we go, I want to mention a few things. You can download and subscribe to our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. You can also hear all of our podcasts at our website, southgatemediagroup.com. Please subscribe to the show and also rate us. We love 5-star ratings. Follow the show on Twitter at The Strain Pod, and Kyle and I at Kyle Loves TV and at Blaire Loves TV. And remember, that's Kyle and Blaire with an E at the end. Send us your fan mail at thestrainpodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget to play #TheStrainBingo with us every week for your chance to be on the podcast with us. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.